Section 7 of The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Buchanan. The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book 1, by Cao Xueqin. Translated by Henry Bencraft Joly. Chapter 3, Part 2. Madame Hsing expressed her assent, and forthwith led Tai-yü to take leave of Madame Wang. The whole party escorted them as far as the door of the entrance hall, hung with creepers, where several youths had drawn a carriage painted light blue, with a kingfisher coloured hood. Madame Hsing led Tai-yü by the hand, and they got up into their seats. The whole company of matrons put the curtain down, and then bade the youths raise the carriage, who dragged it along until they came to an open space, where they at length put the mules into harness. Going out again by the eastern side gate, they proceeded in an easterly direction, passed the main entrance of the Jung mansion, and entered a lofty doorway painted black. On the arrival in front of the ceremonial gate, they at once dismounted from the curricle, and Madame Hsing, hand in hand with Tai-yü, walked into the court. "These grounds," surmised Tai-yü to herself, "must have been originally converted from a piece partitioned from the garden of the Jung mansion." Having entered 3 rows of ceremonial gates, they actually caught sight of the main structure, with its vestibules and porches, all of which, though on a small scale, were full of artistic and unique beauty. They were nothing like the lofty, imposing, massive and luxurious style of architecture on the other side, yet the avenues and rockeries, in the various places in the court, were all in perfect taste. When they reached the interior of the principal pavilion, a large concourse of handmaids and waiting maids, got up in gala dress, were already there to greet them. Madame Hsing pressed Tai-yü into a seat, while she bade some one go into the outer library and request Mr. Chia She to come over. In a few minutes the servant returned. "Master," she explained, "says that he has not quite felt well for several days; that as the meeting with Miss Lin will affect both her as well as himself, he does not for the present feel equal to seeing each other; that he advises Miss Lin not to feel despondent or homesick; that she ought to feel quite at home with her venerable ladyship, her grandmother, as well as her maternal aunts; that her cousins are, it is true, blunt, but that if all the young ladies associated together in one place, they may also perchance dispel some dullness; that if ever Miss Lin has any grievance, she should at once speak out, and on no account feel a stranger, and everything will then be right." Tai-yü lost no time in respectfully standing up, resuming her seat after she had listened to every sentence of the message to her. After a while, she said good bye, and though Madame Hsing used every argument to induce her to stay for the repast and then leave, Tai-yü smiled and said: "I shouldn't under ordinary circumstances refuse the invitation to dinner, which you, aunt, in your love, kindly extend to me; but I have still to cross over and pay my respects to my maternal uncle Secundus. If I went too late, it would, I fear, be a lack of respect on my part; but I shall accept on another occasion. I hope, therefore, that you will, dear aunt, kindly excuse me." "If such be the case," Madame Hsing replied, "it is all right." And presently directing 2 nurses to take her niece over, in the carriage in which they had come a while back, Tai-yü thereupon took her leave, Madame Hsing escorting her as far as the ceremonial gate, where she gave some further directions to all the company of servants. She followed the curricle with her eyes so long as it remained in sight, and at length retraced her footsteps. Tai-yü shortly entered the Jung mansion, descended from the carriage, and preceded by all the nurses, she at once proceeded towards the east, turned a corner, passed through an entrance hall running east and west, and walked in a southern direction, at the back of the large hall. On the inner side of a ceremonial gate, and at the upper end of a spacious court, stood a large main building with 5 apartments, flanked on both sides by outhouses stretching out like the antlers on a head of deer; side gates, resembling passages through a hill, establishing a thorough communication all round; a main building lofty, majestic, solid and grand, and unlike those in the compound of dowager lady Chia. Tai-yü readily concluded that this at last was the main inner suite of apartments. A raised broad road led in a straight line to the large gate. Upon entering the hall and raising her head, she first of all perceived before her a large tablet with blue ground, upon which figured 9 dragons of reddish gold. The inscription on this tablet consisted of 3 characters as large as a peck measure, and declared that this was the Hall of Glorious Felicity. At the end was a row of characters of minute size, denoting the year, month and day, upon which His Majesty had been pleased to confer the tablet upon Chia Yuan, Duke of the Jung Kuo. Besides this tablet were numberless costly articles, bearing the autograph of the Emperor. On the large black ebony table, engraved with dragons, were placed 3 antique blue and green bronze tripods, about 3 feet in height. On the wall hung a large picture representing black dragons, such as were seen in waiting chambers of the Sui dynasty. On one side stood a gold cup of chased work, while on the other a crystal casket. On the ground were placed in 2 rows 16 chairs made of hard grained cedar. There were also a pair of scrolls, consisting of black wood antithetical tablets, inlaid with the strokes of words chased in gold. Their burden was this: "On the platform shine resplendent pearls like sun or moon, and the sheen of the hall facade gleams like russet sky." Below was a row of small characters, denoting that the scroll had been written by the hand of Mu Shih, a fellow countryman and old friend of the family, who, for his meritorious services, had the hereditary title of Prince of Tung Nang conferred upon him. The fact is that madame Wang was also not in the habit of sitting and resting in this main apartment, but in 3 side rooms on the east, so that the nurses at once led Tai-yü through the door of the eastern wing. On a stove couch near the window was spread a foreign red carpet. On the side of honour were laid deep red reclining cushions with dragons, with gold cash for scales, and an oblong brown coloured sitting cushion, with gold cash spotted dragons. On the 2 sides stood one of a pair of small teapoys, of foreign lacquer of peach blossom pattern. On the teapoy on the left were spread out 1 wang tripods, spoons, chopsticks and scent bottles. On the teapoy on the right were vases from the Ju kiln, painted with girls of great beauty, in which were placed seasonable flowers. On it were also teacups, a tea service, and the like articles. On the floor, on the west side of the room, were 4 chairs in a row, all of which were covered with antimacassars, embroidered with silverish red flowers, while below, at the feet of these chairs, stood 4 footstools. On either side was also one of a pair of high teapoys, and these teapoys were covered with teacups and flower vases. The other knickknacks need not be minutely described. The old nurses pressed Tai-yü to sit down on the stove couch, but, on perceiving near the edge of the couch 2 embroidered cushions, placed one opposite the other, she thought of the gradation of seats, and did not therefore place herself on the couch, but on a chair on the eastern side of the room; whereupon the waiting maids in attendance in these quarters hastened to serve tea. While Tai-yü was sipping her tea, she observed the headgear, dress, deportment and manners of the several waiting maids, which she really found so unlike what she had seen in other households. She had hardly finished her tea, when she noticed a waiting maid approach, dressed in a red satin jacket, and a waistcoat of blue satin with scallops. "My lady requests Miss Lin to come over and sit with her," she remarked as she put on a smile. The old nurses, upon hearing this message, speedily ushered Tai-yü again out of this apartment, into the 3-roomed small main building by the eastern porch. On the stove couch, situated at the principal part of the room, was placed in a transverse position a low couch table, at the upper end of which were laid out, in a heap, books and a tea service. Against the partition wall, on the east side, facing the west, was a reclining pillow made of blue satin, neither old nor new. Madame Wang, however, occupied the lower seat, on the west side, on which was likewise placed a rather shabby blue satin sitting rug, with a back cushion; and upon perceiving Tai-yü come in, she urged her at once to sit on the east side. Tai-yü concluded in her mind that this seat must certainly belong to Chia Cheng, and espying, next to the couch, a row of 3 chairs covered with antimacassars, strewn with embroidered flowers, somewhat also worse for use, Tai-yü sat down on one of these chairs. But as madame Wang pressed her again and again to sit on the couch, Tai-yü had at length to take a seat next to her. "Your uncle," madame Wang explained, "is gone to observe this day as a fast day, but you'll see him by and by. There's, however, one thing I want to talk to you about. Your 3 female cousins are all, it is true, everything that is nice, and you will, when later on you come together for study, or to learn how to do needlework, or whenever, at any time, you romp and laugh together, find them all most obliging. But there's one thing that causes me very much concern. I have here one, who is the very root of retribution, the incarnation of all mischief, one who is a ne'er-do-well, a prince of malignant spirits in this family. He is gone to day to pay his vows in the temple, and is not back yet; but you will see him in the evening, when you will readily be able to judge for yourself. One thing you must do, and that is, from this time forth, not pay any notice to him. All these cousins of yours don't venture to bring any taint upon themselves by provoking him." Tai-yü had, in days gone by, heard her mother explain that she had a nephew, born into the world holding a piece of jade in his mouth, who was perverse beyond measure, who took no pleasure in his books, and whose sole great delight was to play the giddy dog in the inner apartments; that her maternal grandmother, on the other hand, loved him so fondly that no one ever presumed to call him to account; so that when, in this instance, she heard madame Wang's advice, she at once felt certain that it must be this very cousin. "Isn't it to the cousin born with jade in his mouth that you are alluding to, aunt?" she inquired as she returned her smile. "When I was at home, I remember my mother telling me more than once of this very cousin, who, she said, was a year older than I, and whose infant name was Pao-yü. She added that his disposition was really wayward, but that he treats all his cousins with utmost consideration. Besides, now that I have come here, I shall, of course, be always together with my female cousins, while the boys will have their own court, and separate quarters; and how ever will there be any cause of bringing any slur upon myself by provoking him?" "You don't know the reasons that prompt me to warn you," replied madame Wang laughingly. "He is so unlike all the rest, all because he has, since his youth, been doted upon by our old lady. The fact is that he has been spoilt, through over indulgence, by being always in the company of his female cousins. If his female cousins pay no heed to him, he is, at any rate, somewhat orderly; but the day his cousins say one word more to him than usual, much trouble forthwith arises, at the outburst of delight in his heart. That's why I enjoin upon you not to heed him. From his mouth, at one time, issue sugared words and mellifluous praises, and at another, like the heavens devoid of the sun, he becomes a raving fool. So whatever you do, don't believe all he says." Tai-yü was assenting to every bit of advice as it was uttered, when unexpectedly she beheld a waiting maid walk in. "Her venerable ladyship over there," she said, "has sent word about the evening meal." Madame Wang hastily took Tai-yü by the hand, and emerging by the door of the back room, they went eastwards by the verandah at the back. Past the side gate was a roadway running north and south. On the southern side were a pavilion with 3 divisions, and a reception hall with a colonnade. On the north stood a large screen wall, painted white. Behind it was a very small building, with a door of half the ordinary size. "These are your cousin Feng's rooms," explained madame Wang to Tai-yü, as she pointed to them, smiling. "You'll know in future your way to come and find her, and if you ever lack anything, mind you mention it to her, and she'll make it all right." At the door of this court were also several youths, who had recently had the tufts of their hair tied together, who all dropped their hands against their sides and stood in a respectful posture. Madame Wang then led Tai-yü by the hand through a corridor, running east and west, into what was dowager lady Chia's back court. Forthwith they entered the door of the back suite of rooms, where stood, already in attendance, a large number of servants, who, when they saw madame Wang arrive, set to work setting the tables and chairs in order. Chia Chu's wife, Ni Li, served the eatables, while Hsi Feng placed the chopsticks, and madame Wang brought the soup in. Dowager lady Chia was seated all alone on the divan, in the main part of the apartment, on the two sides of which stood 4 vacant chairs. Hsi Feng at once drew Tai-yü, meaning to make her sit in the foremost chair on the left side, but Tai-yü steadily and concedingly declined. "Your aunts and sisters-in-law, standing on the right and left," dowager lady Chia smilingly explained, "won't have their repast in here, and as you're a guest, it's but proper that you should take that seat." Then alone it was that Tai-yü asked for permission to sit down, seating herself on the chair. Madame Wang likewise took a seat at old lady Chia's insistence, and the 3 cousins, Ying Ch'un and the others, having craved for leave to sit down, at length came forward, and Ying Ch'un took the first chair on the right, Tan Ch'un the second, and Hsi Ch'un the second on the left. Waiting maids stood by, holding in their hands flips and finger bowls and napkins, while Mrs. Li and lady Feng, the 2 of them, kept near the table, advising them what to eat, and pressing them to help themselves. In the outer apartments, the married women and waiting maids in attendance were, it is true, very numerous, but not even so much as the sound of the cawing of a crow could be heard. The repast over, each one was presented by a waiting maid with tea in a small tray, but the Ling family had all along impressed upon the mind of their daughter that in order to show due regard to happiness, and to preserve good health, it was essential after every meal to wait a while before drinking any tea, so that it should not do any harm to the intestines. When, therefore, Tai-yü perceived how many habits there were in this establishment, unlike those which prevailed in her home, she too had no alternative but to conform herself to a certain extent with them. Upon taking over the cup of tea, servants came once more and presented finger bowls for them to rinse their mouths, and Tai-yü also rinsed hers; and after they had all again finished washing their hands, tea was eventually served a second time, and this was, at length, the tea that was intended to be drunk. "You can all go," observed dowager lady Chia, "and let us alone to have a chat." Madame Wang rose as soon as she heard these words, and having made a few irrelevant remarks, she led the way and left the room along with the 2 ladies, Mrs. Li and lady Feng. Dowager lady Chia, having inquired of Tai-yü what book she was reading, "I have just begun reading the 4 books," Tai-yü replied. "What books are my cousins reading?" Tai-yü went on to ask. "Books, you say?" exclaimed dowager lady Chia; "why, all they know are a few characters, that's all." Section 7.